Hey, folks. Hello. Welcome. This is Mark Silver, Heart of Business. And if you've been around me for any length of time, you've probably heard the name Charlie Gilkey. Charlie is, oh my God, where do I start? He and I have known each other personally for years at this point. Years. We used to, before we so ill-advisedly moved away from Portland, simply because we're too far from Charlie and Angela. We knew each other personally, would hang out, and so my heart has a huge space in it for who he is as a human being and how he shows up in the world and the love he brings. And the topic for today has to do with a book that he just wrote, his latest book, Team Habits. And Charlie also has really deep experience with leadership, with teams. He has his company Productive Flourishing, and they've been helping companies large and small run better. Productive flourishing, there's all these myths and outright mistaken beliefs and lies about what productivity is and how you actually get things done. And Charlie knows his way around this, and I've leaned into him personally plenty. So we're going to be talking about team habits and teams in the context of a heart-centered business. So welcome, Charlie. So glad you're here.
I'm so glad to be here, Mark. And, as you were giving that interview, in the internet space, sometimes you hear people say like my friend, and it's not really a friend, right? It's just kind of a colleague. But when I say Mark is a deep friend of mine, I mean it. Like we were in each other's houses, in each other's kids' lives, like at that deep level. And he's been personally significant for both me and my wife through some things we went through together. So I appreciate that. But I just want people to know, like, if we get extra fraternal here, it's because we have a deep, rich history, and hopefully you'll feel that. But I wanted to give that context there too.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and it's important because at heart everything is about relationship and care and love. And so for me to have so much respect for you, there's times where you have a friend who's a friend, and then they're also like a professional, and they do things that are really amazing. You're like, hold it, I know this guy, but that's next level. So I kind of want to just jump into it.
Let's jump in.
Our audience here at Heart of Business tends to be really tiny businesses, as you know. People that are either solo or people have very tiny teams. We at Heart of Business have a very tiny team, just a handful of people. And the place I wanted to start is that a lot of our folks have had really negative experiences with terrible bosses and terrible jobs. They absolutely refuse to recreate that pattern. It's one of the things, in addition to a number of other factors, that keep them from taking on teams. How would you, this is a huge question, I know, but how would you have a solo business owner who really needs some kind of help start to step into accepting the need for a team, the need to become a leader, how to step into having a healthier relationship with having a team? I'm really curious because I know you've helped people with this.
Yeah, so there are a lot of Trojan horses in team habits. And one of the things that I realized as I started writing about it is like, oh, this is a book about power. Who has it? Who doesn't have it? How do you share it? What do you do when you don't have it? And I didn't want that to be the center point conversation, but it's the foundation of actual what's going on here. So I'm starting there because the terrible experiences people have had with bosses has actually been because of one dimension of power that shows up in the workplace. So let's talk about that real quick, because it's really important when we have tiny teams to realize that there are these different forces at play. So the three main dimensions of power at work are personal power, and we can consider that as power two. That's what Charlie, can do. That's what Mark can do, irrespective of anyone else. It's just our native capabilities. So that's one dimension we talked a lot, especially in the productivity space, is really about personal power, all things considered. And then we have the other very common dimension that we talk about, which is institutional power. And that's power over, right? So much of our tensions, I believe, when we have tiny teams and things like that, is because we focus on those two dimensions and create polarities and create tensions that are unnecessary, because there's this really beautiful middle layer of power, which is interpersonal power. And that's power with. That's separate from what I can do on my own. So throughout this conversation, I'm going to say that, Mark is my teammate. And I'm doing that specifically because I want us to stop thinking about necessarily my team as an abstract concept, and think about the individual wonderful souls that you work with day in and day out. It's the Marks, it's the Angelas, it's the Hollies, it's the Amys. And the reason we do that is because so many of the tensions that we have around team and leadership can start to fade away, because when we start solving problems, it's like, how do I get my team to do something? Well, hold on, pause real quick. How do you get Mark? How do you have a conversation with Mark about doing things? You know who Mark is. Your kids play together. Like, it's not a thing. So much of team habits actually leans into this interpersonal power. And that's honestly where so many small business owners and people on tiny teams want to be. We want to make 1 + 1 = 5, right? That one individual power and another equal 5, but we get trapped in these paradigms. And I'm an executive coach, and Mark knows this, but like, I'm going to say some coachy things today. But when you choose a paradigm, you reinforce that paradigm. When you choose a paradigm, you reinforce that paradigm. And so many of the tensions that we get in with leadership is because we're choosing institutional power. We're choosing to play the game of power over and getting someone to submit or to coerce them to do something, versus choosing interpersonal power, which is really about alignment and partnership, right? And so the great news here is that in tiny teams, institutional power does in fact exist. Like, if you as the business owner are grappling with the fundamental asymmetries that you have power over people's livelihood and choices, like, that is a real thing. But you have other dimensions of power that you can play to, and you don't have to get locked into just that top-down, coercive, submit to my will type of leadership, and can default and say, like, instead of saying, how do I get my team to do something? How do I get Amy? How do I align with Amy and partner with Amy to do this thing that we both want to do?
Well, I'm even thinking, and I love what you're saying, and I love the way you break down those different types of power, because it's so important to understand that there are different types of power, because otherwise, how do you play with them, work with them? I'm actually thinking at the opposite end of the spectrum, where people are reluctant to ask people to do things because of the reluctance to enter into the power dynamic. There's so many people are like, oh my goodness, I can set up my email to go out, or I can schedule my own calls, or I can get through my own email. But there may be like, but I'm going to tell somebody to do something, or I'm going to ask somebody to do something and expect them to come. Like, there's a lot of, I think, personally fraught ground, and I'm curious, your thoughts about how to start to embrace, that you do have institutional power, and that it is okay to ask people to do things if you're hiring them to do things.
That is part of the relationship. Like, people show up to do a job, and people want to do a good job. That's a fundamental thing about, like, I think when we look at who we are as humans and really take that seriously, we'll understand 3 things. 1, we are inherently goal-oriented. It's just part of our evolutionary biology. 2, we want to be in good social rapport with other beings. We are a cooperative species. And 3, we are motivated when we have accomplished something, which is different than the first. People think they're the same, but they're not, right? And so if that's the case, if I'm an employee, if I'm interviewing for a job, I want to get paid, right? That's true. But I also, because I'm human, I want to do a good job, right? And being able to do my good job means that someone needs to give me work to do, right? Otherwise, it's awkward. I've actually worked with, in your same case, and I'm glad we're here, so many tiny team leaders who are like, I don't get any help. They don't help me. And I've talked to their teammates, and they're like, we can't help. Like, we have to fight them. We have to fight them to get them. And like, then they're mad at us because they're paying us because we're not doing our jobs. But they literally block every time that we try to do it, right? And so realize that
okay, so let's let's bring a microscope to that exact dynamic. Like how is too simplistic a question for what I'm asking, but how how do we approach that space? Because I think that is probably one of the biggest obstacles that our audience faces in getting help,
Yeah. So I love this conversation and I love this audience because we get to go really deep into the point. What's really happening at a very deep level is typically the business owner is not ready to receive love and support, or don't think they're worthy of it, or don't think that there are other people who actually will have their back and that they can trust them. And so whether there are deep wounds there or a cognitive disbelief at a certain end of the day, it's like, yeah, I could set up my own email and I can do that and do all that kind of whatnot. But I would always want to interview, just like, but what if your teammates actually want to support and love you and see you do your best work, which is not setting up your email, which is not responding to these things. Like, they actually do want to support and cradle the very best thing that you could put out in the world. And it's not that. When we really get there, we start to unlock that it's not about delegation tactics or how to and things like that. It's really coming to the point of, what would it take for you to believe that people actually want to support and love and appreciate you? And I know we don't talk about those languages and work it enough, right? Because it's like, well, it's a job and they're supposed to just do. Yes, and lean into the fact that this is a tiny team. Like, that is the opportunity that you have, is that you can make it interpersonal. And these people, and so yeah, like there's some limiting beliefs and some feelings and some stuck there because of a lot of different reasons. But what if, before I wrote this book, I used to call this smart sourcing, right? And the idea here is this: for the things you really dread to do, there are people on this planet who would love to do their thing. Like, that's their jam. So your yuck is their yum. Your yuck is their yum. By you holding on to this thing that is yucky for you, not only does it suck for you, they don't get their yum.
Right.
And so part of this is aligning, right?
This is really profound piece, and I'm really glad you went here. I'm not surprised, knowing you as I do, but it's I think that for a solo business owner that's so focused, and somebody who already has a team, there's plenty of folks who already have small teams, but they're, like you said, they're like in a wrestling match, they'll avoid like giving up anything they're doing. I think it's hard to believe that everyone else on the team doesn't cherish the vision of being, of like a self-expressing at that level that a business owner does. That there are people who just actually have other priorities in their life, and they're actually happy to have a really happy work environment and people who care about them and work that feels meaningful that they're contributing to. And I think it's really hard for business owners to get that in their bones, that people are just happy being in the supporting role.
Yeah. Well, owners and entrepreneurs are the outliers of a lot of human experience when it comes to, when you think about the risk and the decisions and the responsibilities and the fears and all those types of things that it takes to be an owner. A lot of people just don't want to do that. A lot of people don't want to be in sales conversations. A lot of people don't want to be self-promoting. A lot of people don't want to like have quote unquote hard conversations. They don't want to do this. It's like, I would really love to show up and do a great job and to know that I'm valued, and then turn it off and go home. Right. And what can entrepreneurs not, and small business owners not do? Well, turn it off and go home is one of them. Right. Also keep things bounded into a certain degree. We struggle with that. And so it's like, if you expect them to be you, you're going to have the same problems you already have. Right. Because you're just going to keep recreating. And then this is why when, I love the guidance that we'll sometimes see about hiring, which is like, hire entrepreneurial folks. Well, that is actually really good in corporate spaces. But in smaller team spaces, maybe you don't need a bunch more visionaries. Maybe you need someone who just loves to do that thing. So to make this very specific, I love Shannon McDonough. She's our executive assistant and client services manager. She's been with us since 2013. And when we hired her in the job description, I don't know that I would use this language anymore given the state of mental health, but it's like, I want the special kind of nut that loves scheduling and getting spreadsheets in order and things like that. Like, if that is your thing, this job is for you, because I don't like it. Charlie doesn't like it, and it needs to be done. She loved that. She'd been doing it since 1991. When she showed up in 2013 or so and said she wanted this job, I was like, perfect, because she's been doing it that long and that's her jam. So when it comes time to reach out to schedule with Mark, I don't think, oh, well, I could reach out and schedule with Mark and I don't need to bother Shannon and I don't need to do all that kind of what. I'm like, that's actually what Shannon likes to do. Like, that's her job. Every time I touch my Jenga tower of a schedule, right? Number one, I mess her work up.
Right.
But number two, it's denying her the thing that she wants to do and that she's here to do. And she had a really great conversation with me, because I was in my head about this around that time frame, and I was like, well, I didn't want to call and ask you to do something while I was going on the way. And she said, and I've told her this before, so I'm not doing this, but she said, Charlie, this is my job. This is my job to be here when you're going in between all these things, to pick up and help you get this sorted along the way. Let me do my job.
Right.
Right. And so I want to say that because, like, again, so many people start their small business or they start their family because they're rebelling from the work history that they've had in the past, and they're bringing that baggage and injecting it into their own business.
Yeah.
Right. And they're choosing the paradigm and therefore reinforcing it. So they're like, oh, I hated working. I hated my boss tasking me. I hated doing all those types of things. I wanted to do my own thing. So therefore I started my own business, which is great. But turns out, at a certain point, unless you make a conscious effort to limit the scope and scale of your business, you are going to need to hire someone at some point.
Well, and I'm going to say that even for an extremely limited solo business, you're still going to need help. You don't need to necessarily hire an employee.
Precisely.
We have people on payroll, but it's like, you don't need a payroll, but you should not be doing your own accounting and your own bookkeeping. You should, like, there's administrative tasks. It's just things that you don't need to be doing, even if it's just a few hours a month that you're getting support. But and also, point of fact, I totally messed up our appointment today because I had my hands on it and I shouldn't have, because I forgot to send the link to you all. And I shouldn't have had my hands in that, but I did.
Not your job, and that's okay. Like,
right.
I gave him, but I was like, Mark's not doing his job.
But I want to highlight this. I want to highlight. I don't mind making mistakes, especially with such a loving friend. But this is important. Like, if we didn't know each other so well, I could have messed up our relationship, by not following through. So,
if I may, real quick on something, right? And I really want to talk about very specific to virtual assistants and people who do admin, sort of back office support or email scheduling or email sort of monitoring or scheduling. There's a mindset, I had it once, and I know many of my clients do. It's like, well, if it's important to me, I should be doing all of that. Right. I really want to make sure the relationship, like, Mark is a dear friend. I don't need Shannon to schedule something. I could text Mark. I can do these, and if it's important to me, I should be doing it myself. And there's another story here. If it's important to me, I'm going to make sure it gets done well. Right. If it's important to me, I'm going to make sure that it gets done well. And I'm willing to put money behind making sure it gets done well, because I really want to respect Mark's time or my friend's time. And so when we're there, I want us to be fully seated. And most of my friends are visionaries or sort of creative types. And these are things we're not good at, right? It's not our jobs. And I don't say that those jobs are beneath us. It's just we're fundamentally wired a different way. So it's important enough to me to make sure that it's done well and to put money behind it.
Well, so here, that's a really good point. And I have it written down. I want to ask this. How would you recommend someone determine, when is it that you, despite whatever tight financial budget you're under that you can't afford not to?
Yeah, this is one of the trickiest business questions, and I'm going to try to I'm going to try to not say it depends, because that's what we always want to say, is because
It does
it
depend.
definitely
There's like
depends.
you're not gonna. I want to say for the entire audience that there's no answer that anybody can give that's like a perfect formula that's going to give you the definite answer.
Yeah.
But knowing you, I wanted to, like, how do you think about it? How do you approach this question? Is kind of what we're looking for, I
I
think.
think about it in two different dimensions. What is the dollarized opportunity cost here of this thing not happening?
Can you say
Um,
that in
in
yeah,
non-business
in non-business terms?
non-business terms. Thank you for that. When you sort of add up in your head, what are the different things that you would be able to do if you actually did that and put a dollar sign to it, right? Like, if you know that if you had, I'm just going to stick with admin support and VA support because it
Yeah.
makes it very tangible, right? If you know that you are not scheduling appointments with 15 to 20 people a month or so, just because you keep falling down and it's just not your thing, and you know that a third of the people that you have, consults with actually turn into clients, and let's say those clients turn into $1,000, then you can sort of say like, oh, that's $3,000 to $5,000 right there, that every month I don't have a real plan in place to get.
Mhm.
And so if I need to pay someone $1,000 a month to make that $3,000 to $5,000, that's a good ROI. That's like, there's going to be some learning, there's going to be some process breaks, but fundamentally, I don't think entrepreneurs and small business owners understand that they don't actually have a solution to that problem if it's just them working harder,
Right.
right? Do you really want to do that 2-hour task, that takes you, 2 hours a week forever? And if you do, that's fine, because like, I want to push back against the Michael Gerber, like, scale and span and build a franchise. Like, you might want to make pies, and that's fantastic. Make your pies, do the thing that you want to do, be the spiritual teacher you want to be, like, do that. That's great. But if you don't, at some point, you're going to optimize technology to the furthest it's going to go, right? That's usually the first round that I would recommend somebody. Can a tool do that? And then at a certain point, it's going to be like, it actually needs a human, turns out. And does that human need to be you? Does it need to be you? And what would you be able to create in that time that you spend worrying about whether you got the link to somebody, or whether you actually scheduled things, or whether they got the reminder to follow up? Like, how many, and I'll talk about practitioners here, how many clients don't show up simply because they didn't get a reminder? Right? Because
Right.
you didn't send a reminder, your system didn't send a reminder, or the reminder goes to some weird, folder. Like, how much time are you spending in missed sessions because a client didn't show up? Where if you had someone that just sent them a note 2 or 3 days before, it's like, hey,
Mhm. Right.
you have a meeting coming up. Like, do we need to change this, or what's going on here? Right.
And I want to say that for our audience, that this applies, like you were using numbers like 3,000 to 5,000, paying somebody $1,000, which is like, that is absolutely true. And it also functions if it's $300 to $500 and you're going to pay somebody $100 for like 3 hours of work over the course of a month, or 4 hours of work over the
Precisely.
course of a month.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
And even at that level, and I guess I want to add in that it's worthwhile, like my view on this, trailing, in train with what you're saying, is that I think it's actually really useful, even if it's a very small gain, to do it because it's good to get into it.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you can get into it and even just come out even, or come out even just slightly ahead, $50, $100 ahead, um, it's really good to start that going, because once you start to open up that space, then more and more possibility comes in.
Yeah, you're
So
touching in on the second part of that question, if I don't, because
mhm,
you asked me to sort of
yeah.
de-Charlify dollarized opportunity cost, which I really appreciate. The second is, how much of your life and energy do you get back?
Mhm,
Right. And I don't think we think about that enough, because if you do your full thing all day, and then you've got to do your admin, and then, you've got your kids running in the background saying like, daddy, daddy, like, when we get to play, or your wife has to pick up things, or your, husband has to pick up different things because you're not doing that. That also has a cost. It may not be as easily dollarizable, but how many entrepreneurs and small business owners do you know that do the first shift in their business of the actual thing that create the actual thing? I have to be careful about that. The thing that they say creates value. And then they spend a second shift just doing the admin that does that. Like, what if you didn't have to do that second shift and you can actually spend time with your family, or you could actually go to church, or you can actually breathe and exercise and take care of yourself? Like, we spend money and time in all sorts of weird places, right? And so I just ask people to say, like, what if, even if we just call it, this is your love and support fund in your business that your business pays for, so that you can be supported to do that thing that you do, and by someone, again, who wants to do that job, who actually needs that job and needs that money. And there's a different relationship that happens because they don't necessarily dread it, right? That's what they showed up to
Right.
do. And you're mad about sending that email and you got to do the thing and you got to do all the sort of whatnot, where someone else is out there looking for work to do that very thing. Right. So I think I want us to really sink into so much about business in the way that we talk about it, Mark, is about the exchange of energy and the sharing of energy and things like that. And so, to that second point that you just mentioned, how much better would it feel to know that as the business owner, you actually have hours that you can attend to, and that there are other people that pick up other parts of it, and it's not all you all the time, everywhere, throughout time.
It it feels pretty awesome. I have to say that just to reflect on this personally, that much earlier, I've been doing this for over 20 years now, and much earlier, yeah, I used to work my tail off doing all of these things. And it's been true for a long time that my full-time work week tends to be 20 to 30 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it means, especially without a commute, because I'm working from home like so many of us do, that's a lot of time for family and for other things. So I'm just wanting to emphasize, put an exclamation point on what you're saying and how important that's been
Yeah, thanks
for
for that.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for all of us. I mean, we don't have to buy into the hustle culture, the burnout culture. We don't have to inject that into the system. And so much of that culture is built on weird versions of the hero complex of, like, you're the one person that saves the world and all that sort of stuff. And
Mhm.
it makes for a good cinematic movie, but it sucks for a lifestyle.
Mhm. So there's one other question I want to get into. Um, and a lot of the answer to the question is to read the book and to be with it.
I appreciate that.
And uh, well, I appreciate you writing the book, and having my own book coming out very shortly, knowing intimately what it takes to write a book and publish it. So I just, um, I'm just delighted. Because there's so much wisdom in this book, and it's very practical. It's very practical. It's deep in surprising ways, like some of your answers to the questions today, I think, bringing in love and relationship and things like that. But it's very practical in terms of how it breaks things down. But the question I wanted to ask, I think, has to do with, for someone who doesn't have the experience running a team, or only has very dysfunctional experience either being on a team or running a team, and you're starting to step into it. You're like, okay, I've got people,
Hmm.
at whatever level, and you're going to be making mistakes. Like, can you name some of the how do I want to say this? It's like, when I think about the learning process, I think that there are learning, like, we're going to always make mistakes. It's always going to be messy, and hallelujah, because that's how we figure out the terrain that we're on. I'm committed to making mistakes and making messes because that's how it works. But when you're dealing with other people's livelihood and other people's, just other people and their quality of life and their work, like, what are some of the signs that you can maybe spot in yourself that, like, okay, this is just part of the learning process and it's okay to make mistakes, versus, like, what are some of the signs of, like, whoa, I need to really stop and look at what's going on and kind of get more in alignment with myself or with my team member?
Yeah,
Do you get the flavor of what I'm asking?
I get the flavor of it, like what's just learning in process and what's you keep hitting the same broken printer or the same snag over and over again, and the lesson really isn't being learned on that front. Is how I
Right,
took that one.
right. And maybe you're, and you're affecting other people, like it's having an impact on other people. So,
Yeah, so part of this is knowing yourself and your own limitations. So, self-awareness and knowing the types of patterns that you get into when you're stressed and elated can go a long way. For instance, some people have, when they're, a complex of when they're very insecure, they're going to try to control everything. Right. And so they don't let people make decisions. They don't let people have any autonomy. They don't let people have any creativity because it has to be exactly right. And understanding, like, oh, that's not about necessarily like practices and tactics. That's a deep inner thing that you need to work out. Like that's part of the entrepreneurial journey. And that until you really say, oh, those are all behaviors that are responding against my insecurity or my feeling of a lack of value. And I need to understand that when those things happen, I need to have a different response. That's the type of thing you got to work on. Right. But the beauty that I want us to lean into with team habits is every team and every individual on that team is unique, which means the way that you phrase that to your teammate 2 years ago that went on and has lived their best life and done something else, and the new teammate you have, it may not work. You may have to try that again. Right. And so a few things to sort of embrace as a team leader. One, you are going to be repeating yourself a lot, a lot, because you're dealing with dynamic humans that memories can be faulty and will have different sort of ways of understanding information as they get it all the time. And so I say that because so many small business owners and team leaders like, I just get tired of having to repeat myself. Well, that's part of the gig, right? And because people need that, and not in a like, no, stop, no, stop, but just recontextualizing your values, your vision, your plans, right? Your goals. Like, we forget that for people who don't own and haven't created that goal, 2 months from now, you may not even remember what you talked about. Like, it was great at that quarterly meeting, but it's been 2 months later and I've eaten a lot and had a lot of things since then. I don't remember that. So you're going to have to
yeah,
repeat that. And that is just one of those things that even as you learn it and get good at it, you're going to have to continue to do that. In the context, especially of the audience we're talking about here, it's hard to over index on giving people parameters on how to make decisions and how you work through things. Because so many small business owners and small team leaders are intuitive decision makers. They just see something and they make a decision and they go with it. And they made the decision, they've gone on, and their team has no idea what happened there. And the more you participate in that and don't try to unpack how you're making that decision, the more you create the very thing you don't want, which is your team not being able to make decisions. Because every time there's a decision, there's like, just ask Mark. He'll know instantly.
right.
Right. Well, Mark knows because Mark has had 20 years of pattern recognition and understanding that and things like that. And it's the work of the team and Mark to sit down. It's like, hold on. I agree with the decision. This is not about saying we should have made another decision, but how did we get there? How did we get there? Because I want to learn how to make that decision myself, or I want to learn how to give you the information so that it's easier for you to make that decision.
This is great. This is a great point. Like being able to stop and have conversations about how, and I, when you first said, oh, you've got to unpack that, I was thinking, God, that's not going to be easy, but it's much easier in the context of a conversation with someone. Like like asking the question, how did you get there, is much easier. In particular, like, here's this decision, how did you get to this decision, rather than like, how do you make decisions? Like, that's a really tough one.
Yeah, no, that's why I don't teach in that way, like how to make general decisions. Like, I can give some dimensions, but
Right.
usually it's best in the context of what we're talking about is like, hey, you um you decided not to work with that client, and yet we need money. How did you come to that decision?
Right.
Right. Or controversially, you've said we don't need to take on any more clients, and yet you said yes to that client. How, like, I'm not disagreeing. Again, let's not make this about conflict. Let's not make it
Right,
around you did this wrong. I am
right.
trying to understand, because I need to know whether in my work, I need to shut client flow off, or if I need to expand it. Like, now I'm confused by that
Right,
decision and I don't know what you're operating from.
right.
Right. And
This is
just
such a
unpacking that.
well, it's such a beautiful thing because if you're willing to be vulnerable and trust as a business owner or leader, like it 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 might be a place where you're going to reveal, oh yeah, there was these factors that I hadn't told you about. Or it might be like, oops, I think I made the wrong choice. Thank you for calling it to my attention. And yeah, it's hard for me to say no to potential clients. You can help by not letting those people get to me when we're full. This is, and you're not, this is exactly what you're already thinking about, but it's just brilliant because you can, like, when we know that we have, I guess I'll just call them weak spots, or
The blind
places where
spots.
less
Yeah.
places we're less practiced or less strong in or clear in ourselves, that we don't have to heal or become enlightened. We can create structures and support from our team around us to encourage the decisions that we say we want when we're in a more centered space, as opposed to like in front of a client or in front of a, or looking at the P&L or whatever. So
Precisely. Well, and in Team Habits, I talk about someone being the voice of no on your team, and actually
mhm.
celebrating the voice of no, because part of the voice of no's job is to be like, hey, so we said we were going to do fewer projects this quarter, but it looks like we're doing the same amount, if not more, than when we made that decision. Like, can we, like, what's going on here? Like, how did we get here? And that takes a lot of courage for someone to do, especially with the person that's paying your check, right?
Yes, it is. It is. And I want to highlight this too, because there's a thing we've been talking about internally at Heart of Business recently. And I came into a position of strength because it was me stepping into a certain kind of decision. And the person who's been with us probably the longest was able to voice their opinion, which moderated my opinion, which I don't think I could have stepped back from it without letting go of like the certain kind of transmission of strength that I was trying to access in myself. But having their opinion and perspective enabled that moderation to happen. And it took a long time, because everyone we've ever hired has always been in, like, because it's so endemic, really dysfunctional work experiences prior. And it takes a long time for them to trust that we mean what we say,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm like, no, we're not going to punish, please tell me what you're thinking, and like,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So I just love that you were using that example, because it feels, just because I could illustrate it with something that just feels
Yeah.
very alive and active at the
Yeah. And
moment.
so, and again, as the leader, goes back to the first part of the conversation. If you started your business because you got tired of people telling you no and shut down and we can't do that and so on and so forth, and then that's injected into how you think about how teammates should work with you, and you think that all teammates, you don't, we normally don't think we don't say the absurdities out loud, we just kind of think and feel them, but like, a job of the teammate is to figure out how to do what I say to do. And so for them to say no is disrespectful and them sort of challenging me and things like that. Like, if that's what you're injecting into the system, what you're going to get is like people who don't stay long, one, but two, you're just going to look around your business and it's like, it seems like we say yes to a lot, but we don't actually finish a whole lot. And what's that about?
Right,
It's like, well,
right.
no, you can't say no. Like, you can't say no in this business. So we just have to say yes. And then we end up in these awkward conversations that basically are the owner's fault. That's like, why are you not getting things done? And it's like, well,
Right.
we're kind of spread too thin and we said yes to a lot of things. Well, why are you doing that? Because there's not really space to say no.
Yeah, because
Right.
you're not right.
And so
It's
what would happen if we'd said, you know what, here are some things as a business owner I need help with. Like, I know Charlie knows that Charlie is an ambitious guy who can have commitments creep up on him and expand.
Right.
right? And so I actually do know and need the support for teammates to be like, it seems like we're getting close to overcommitting. So let's stop here because what we've already committed to is going to blow up on us a little bit.
Right.
And then we're going to be at full capacity. But if we try to do it at full capacity and then it blows up,
Then we're done. Yeah.
then we're done. And I need that because I will jump off of this wonderful conversation with Mark and I'll be like, okay, here are the 8 things that we could do from this call. Right. And then just initiate those, right?
Right.
Without stopping and say, wait a second, my team was at capacity before the call. It's not like they magically delicious, like in that 1 hour came up with a bunch more time. No.
Right.
So
Right.
just because I came up with an idea doesn't mean we have to do that idea.
Right.
And so how am I, when I talk to leaders on that side of things, one of the key questions that I'll ask them is like, how are you participating or generating the very result that you don't want? How are you participating in that pattern and reinforcing that pattern? And what's it going to take to change your participation? And let's start there. Let's not talk about like how to get teammates to do it. Like, how do you just stop doing that piece? And let's do that work. And then it turns out so many of the team problems start to sort of not be there. Well,
Right.
we didn't touch the teammate except for
Right.
you.
That's such a powerful and humbling question, and it's really helpful. So this is really beautiful. I feel like we could talk a lot longer, but I want to kind of draw it to a close because really what people need to do is go sit with the book.
I appreciate that.
We'd be here a long time if we were, going through all the different pieces of this book. But is there anything that you want to add, or some piece that you wanted to, that you wanted to end with, or?
Yeah. So, I'll start the substantive chapters of Team Habits with belonging as the first sort of thing to practice habits around. And that's somewhat revolutionary for a lot of audiences, but I don't know if it's going to be for your audience because of how much, we know that every act of business is an act of love and things like that. So those practices are baked in. So make sure that you're attending to the belonging, how the social, like the safety people feel in your team. And, there are 2 ways of thinking about this, or 2 main ways we come to work. Some of us need to feel safe and we need to feel that belonging before we can do hard things. And then some of us need to do hard things before we can feel that belonging and that sort of safety. And there's no one right answer here. There are roughly gender lines here. But I'm going to speak to the doing the hard things thing side of things more. I want us to, I'll say it in the way that will be audience, will be with our communities here. I want us to remember to stay human in our businesses and understanding, like, let's normalize that at any given point in time, some teammate is going to fall down or be behind on something because we're humans and there are 4 to 8 of us. And that just means life is going to impact one of us in a different way. And if a teammate's behind, the team is behind. Let's, and by normalizing and saying, hey, that's okay. Your mom got sick, or that's okay. Like the kids, had a thing, or your house got flooded. We've got you. How can we move around that? It's not that you're a bad person, you're incompetent and you can't get right. It's just your turn. And next week, it might be my turn. And then the next week is going to be another teammate's turn. And to save some space and margin and grace for that, and really talk to each other and develop habits around the support that we need as teammates when we do fall behind, because we get this wrong a lot, Mark. Like, for instance, it's like, oh, Mark is overwhelmed. And so I'm going to take work from Mark and make sure that he doesn't have to do a whole bunch of work. But we don't know whether or not Mark finds meaning and satisfaction and a sense of safety at work, at doing his job. And if we say, nope, I'm going to take that from you because you can't do it, and then there's something else going on Mark's life and he goes home and someone has taken something else from him and he can't do it, we're reinforcing the message as opposed to saying, hey, Mark, like, it's kind of awkward, but like, I kind of think that you might be falling a little bit behind. Are you seeing that? It's like, yes, I'm totally falling behind. I'll use myself, so I'm not putting Mark on this, right? Yes, I am totally falling behind.
I'm behind.
Right? And so instead of being like, okay, well, we're going to take things from you, we can do the simple practice. And so much of Team Habits is about simple practices. So I know if it sounds simple, you're like, really, that's it, Charlie? Yes, that is actually it. If you say, oh, cool, all right, it's your turn. It's cool. What do you actually need for support from me? What is it helpful for me to just sit here with you for an hour or two on Zoom while you're doing your work? Do you need a brainstorm? Like, what can I do? Don't just assume I need to take work from them, because you might be doing the exact opposite thing that they need to feel like they belong and feel sense of satisfaction and that they contribute to this thing that's really important to them.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys, just, if you're approaching having a team or you already have a small team, you just can't go, it's a book. It's a book. Buy the book. It's not a $10,000 program. It's a book. Buy the book. And I highly recommend everything that Charlie does. You can find them at productiveflourishing.com. They're your podcast, if I can speak, and just being in your audience and the things that you send out are just always helpful. And I just, I love you, and I'm really grateful for your presence and your work in this world.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Listeners, if you really want to just focus on the book, you can go to betterteamhabits.com. It'll take you directly to more conversations around the book. And as Mark said, one, Mark, thanks so much for having me. But two, whenever you're thinking about team dynamics and team patterns, please remember that you're talking about the Marks and the Angelas and the Hollies and the Megans, and not abstract people who you don't know, who you don't love, and who do not have your back. And I promise you, when you approach it that way, you might find different spaces for love to come in there, for imagination to come in there, for can do to come in there. And that's available to you right now, right here.
Beautiful. All right, folks, thanks for joining us for this conversation. And I just wish the very best to you and your business.